All right, good morning, everyone. Hope you all are having a good day today. So, today we're in Chapter 5. Chapter 5 is about protecting security of assets. So we'll be covering today, starting off, identifying and classifying information assets. Go through some different ways to do that. Talk about establishing asset management policies. Okay. We'll cover data protection methods. Okay, we'll talk about understanding data roles, as well as using security baselines. So, I think one of the most important topics from this chapter is understanding that not every piece of data has the same characteristics. What that means is you may have one piece of data that may be considered directory information. Okay, so directory information is freely available. Okay, does it matter if that information is leaked? Why or why not? It's freely available anyway. Okay. Then on the other side of the spectrum, which we'll talk more about the specific spectrum I'm referring to, you have very sensitive information. Okay? That means that if it were breached in some way, it could cause detrimental impact. So those are sort of the two extremes there. Okay? So you always start off with considering the data. Okay, if you have highly sensitive data, you're going to be treating it a lot differently than if you have non-sensitive data. Okay, so that deals with confidentiality. Okay, confidentiality being the goal of at least one of the three goals of information security. Keeping everything that needs to be confidential, confidential. Okay, proprietary. I think we talked last class about trade secrets, right? Okay, so trade secrets are proprietary. They're not necessarily sensitive in that, let's say that they're leaked. You're not going to hurt anyone's feelings, okay? But could you negatively impact the performance through losing competitive advantages by leaking proprietary information? Absolutely. Okay? Protected information. It's basically going to be sensitive information that regulations would prohibit disclosing. So I have on here protected health information as an example. And that's going to be governed by HIPAA and many other regulations. HIPAA's the main one, though. All right, so that's pretty basic stuff there. Personally identifiable information is going to be, as the name would suggest, anything that could be used to identify someone. So theoretically, a name is PII. Now, more likely, you're talking about information that people don't just have by, greeting you, okay? So addresses, phone numbers, social security numbers, banking accounts, okay? All that is stuff that's PII. Now, for almost every organization, do they have to collect that from some people? Maybe employees, maybe, customers. In most cases, don't businesses have to have some amount of PII? So they have to secure it, okay, using reasonable means. We're going to talk about that in this chapter, as well as 17 goes into a good bit of that as well. So here are classifications that the government places on stuff. Okay, they have unclassified. If something is unclassified, you can think of it as being freely available on a website. Not every piece of unclassified information is freely available on a website, but if you get in that mindset of thinking that it's already out there, they published it knowing that it wouldn't cause any damage, I think it'll make a lot of sense. Okay, the other end of the spectrum here, we have top secret. Okay, top secret is information that is definitely not freely published. And it's going to be highly regulated in terms of who can access it and how they can access it. Certainly, there have been some examples where top secret information might have gotten on servers that were not U.S. government owned. Okay, I'm sure we could think of a few. All right. That would be a violation of the government's data security practices. All right, then in between there, you have confidential and secret. So basically the idea here is that something that's confidential is going to be something that won't cause a ton of harm, but it's still not going to get out. Okay? So, you could probably throw in some government programs that will be unpopular. Okay? And that's going to be something that they may try to keep confidential. Now, this goes into a whole discussion on, stuff like various sunshine laws, okay? FOIA, okay, that's the federal example. Colorado has CORA, okay? Colorado Open Records Act. A lot of this stuff, even if it's confidential, you may be able to request it. Now, there's no guarantees, okay? And you can fight in court about it. Nothing in here is legal advice, but just understand that as you go up the spectrum here, the information becomes potentially more and more damaging. All right? So there's a lot of stuff that will not be released for X amount of years. All right? Recently, a lot of the Kennedy files, they went up. They were classified as either secret or top secret, and they still weren't released. All right? So I'm not stating any opinion on that. I'm just using that as an example. All right, then of course you also have private sector. All right, if we just had a government, it wouldn't be very interesting, would it? Okay, we wouldn't have a school of business. We'd have anyway, we're not going there. All right, so you got public information. Like I said, that's directory information, freely available on the company's website. And you have confidential, proprietary. Okay, so why is proprietary information the top of this pyramid? Why is it not a little bit lower? Not a trick question. Exactly right, okay? So let's say that Coca-Cola, okay, they have their secret ingredients, right? Secret recipe, whatever. Okay, they make a big deal. If you've ever been to the World of Coke in Atlanta, they make a really big deal about keeping that recipe locked up. Okay, and supposedly only like a couple people know about it. Let me rephrase that. They know it exists. They just don't know the specific recipe. All right. So why do they do that? Is it partially for marketing? I think it's partially for marketing, but from a financial standpoint, we don't care about marketing in here. Well, I shouldn't say that. I don't care about marketing in here. That I can say. From a management standpoint, from a business standpoint, why not just publish the recipe? Exactly right, okay? So that would increase their competition. All right, Coca-Cola has value as a brand. Okay, you talk about valuing stuff like goodwill. Yeah, Coca-Cola has that value. People like Coke, okay? I'm not going to ask if you're a Coke or a Pepsi fan, but I'm sure some people in here probably drink Coca-Cola, all right? Now, if you could go off and get the same exact drink for half price, would you? If it's literally the same, I don't know why you wouldn't. All right. So if you think about that, that means that trade secrets have value in keeping them secret. All right, as soon as it's out there, does it have much value? No. Now, we know that patents expire after 20 years. So in some cases, may it make sense to not seek a patent? I think it probably would. Okay, so imagine you had an instance where there was a company and they developed a new technology, and it's not required to be regulated by any governing bodies like FDA, CDC, any of those. Okay, something they can just freely make. Should they seek a patent for it? Why or why not? And we're going to assume this cannot be reverse engineered. Who says they should? Why do you say they should? So patents last for 20 years. And if they don't seek a patent and the invention of whatever sort cannot be reverse engineered, basically at the end of 20 years, it's a gamble, okay? Because let's say you have a rogue employee who leaves and goes to a competitor or just starts their own thing. If there's no intellectual property protection, you can do whatever, okay? And that may be a case in which a patent would be helpful. But I think that a lot of companies would choose the approach of not seeking a patent on such things. Why? Exactly right. Okay, so you got 20 years protection, then anyone can use it with a patent. Does everyone understand that? Whereas with not having a patent, you know, if you keep the information confidential for more than 20 years, it's only yours. Now, in most cases, is that going to be that helpful? Well, it depends. For an industry like information technology, probably it's not going to help you too much. Okay, very rapidly changing landscape. You know, whatever you patented 20 years ago. Think about wireless standards. You know, let's say instead of having IEEE 802 working group, let's say that we had a private company doing it. Would it be helpful for them to patent that wireless standards? I would argue it probably would in that case. Because when we think about that, think about how much wireless standards have improved. All right. Is anyone losing any sleep over wireless 802.11a or B, even G for that matter? I mean, at this point we have, 6E, okay? So that is a case where, there's rapid development. Probably makes sense to seek a patent. Because in 20 years, it's not going to be valuable anyway, okay? Does everyone understand that? But that's a technological example. In a lot of other industries, let's say that you have a new manufacturing process. Okay, and you can make, let's just say, a solid-state battery. Everyone knows what a solid-state battery is, right? So the idea is that it would be basically a better battery than lithium-ion. Okay, be able to charge better, last longer, that sort of stuff. So if you can develop that, do you expect other competitors to be able to do something similar? Okay, if you do, then you should seek a patent. If you don't, take a gamble and not seek a patent. Again, no right or wrong answer there. All right, it's a matter of opinion. I think that it depends on many factors. I listed off a lot of them. And then you got sensitive stuff. You obviously don't want to get anything like that out. And of course you have private files. Private files could cause some damage. But certainly what we're most concerned with as a company is the PII that we have, because that's going to cause reputational harm. And we're also concerned with any sort of confidential documents that we deem being highly sensitive, particularly things like those proprietary files. Okay, like say, you may choose whether or not to seek formal intellectual property protection. I'm not here to say what to do. That's something you should consult a lot of qualified persons. All right, 3 major types of data states. Okay, so we have data at rest. Okay, that means it's not moving around. And we can think of this as being something that's stored on a hard drive or some sort of drive for long term. So it's not volatile, it's not in transit, it's just there. All right, and then we have data in transit. That is a piece of data that is actively being transferred from one location to another, most likely over a network. It doesn't have to be, though. So data in transit could be, I download a database, pop it on a flash drive, and I drive home with it. That's technically data in transit, right? All right, and then data in use. So data in use, of course, is going to be data that's actively being used, and it's going to be stored in volatile memory, most likely RAM. Doesn't have to be RAM, though. What else could it be stored in? Okay, it's not a trick question. How about video RAM? All right, that's not technically RAM, right? You can still store stuff in video RAM, though, certainly, right? Okay, that's pretty obvious. What else? Cache, exactly. Okay, so let's say it's on a drive cache. It's actually being transferred. That certainly could be the case. I think those are the main ones. Most likely, though, we're going to think of this as being on RAM. But all 3 of those are what type of memory? Volatile or non-volatile? What does that mean? It's temporary, and what happens when you power the system down? Exactly, it's not going to stay. So that's data in use. So data in use is still data in storage, arguably. Just not data in permanent storage. So let's talk about how you would actually go about protecting these three. I think the first one should be pretty obvious to us. All right, we have data on storage. We don't want anyone to be able to access it without authorization, of course. How do we do it? Starts with an E. Encryption. Okay, we're going to talk more about encryption in later chapters, but for now, if something's in rest, encrypt it. Data in use. Okay, there's several different ways we could go about this. I kind of disagree with the textbook a little bit here, where it says you cannot encrypt memory contents. I don't think they're right about that. You can certainly have protected memory instances, especially across virtual machines. So I would certainly say look into those options. Because if you think about it, okay, I don't have any markers with me. I'll be okay. So think about you have cloud storage, all right, and it's highly scalable. That's a big advantage, right? But you don't necessarily have a piece of bare metal for just you. Does everyone understand that? So what do you most likely have instead? Virtual machines, exactly right, okay? So with various vulnerabilities like Spectre, Meltdown, all those sort of CPU vulnerabilities, let's say that someone nefarious shares that piece of bare metal with you, okay? And you guys know what I mean by bare metal, right? Okay, there's a physical server hardware. It's the actual server, not a piece of metal, although it does contain a lot of metal. All right, so let's say that they are able to use those exploits and access everything on the system. And that's a big concern with those vulnerabilities. Everyone understands that, right? The concern is not the desktop user, okay? Because you have to have physical access to the system for that, right? But if you got a virtual machine, you can theoretically run pretty much anything on it. That's where the big concern comes in. So encrypted memory certainly is something that you can and should do in those cases. For highly secure information, you can request what's called a private cloud, where you do have the piece of hardware exclusively. There were several contracts a while back for, I think, the DoD, worth about $10 billion. It's a really interesting battle between Amazon and Microsoft. I suggest you look that one up. But the gist of it is that the DoD, or maybe it was DOJ, one of those three-letter agencies, they wanted to get a private cloud. And they ruled out, I think it was Oracle and some other company. They ended up going with Azure. And Amazon ended up suing whichever agency it was, claiming unfair discrimination. I'm not here to state an opinion on whether that's a legitimate claim or not, but it's something I'd recommend you look into just on your own time. Okay, so that's how you protect data in use. One of the ways. What else? How about basic workstation security? All right, if you walk away from a computer, what should you do? Lock it, okay? Let's say you walk out of a room. What should you do to that room? You should lock it, right? Okay. So, protected memory is very important, but that's not all there is. It's also about all the different layers there. Lastly, we got data in transit. That's data that's actively being transmitted. Now, if it's transmitted while it's at rest, then what should you do? Like, let's say that I download a database, plop it on a flash drive, and drive home. If it has secure information on it, what should I do? Encrypt that, okay? But we're going to take a more conventional definition here and say that in transmit, it's across a network. So there's a couple different approaches there. Most basic one would be a VPN. Okay, and I don't mean like some commercial VPN you buy. I mean like a corporate VPN. Okay, because that will ensure that there's going to be end-to-end encryption on that entire transmission. All right, that's certainly the most common approach and probably the best approach overall. Beyond that, we talked last semester about things like SSL and TLS. Obviously, you'd want to use those for websites. I think the best answer here, though, is going to be just making sure you're using a VPN. All right, and that's a corporate VPN, just to be clear. Any questions? All right, asset handling requirements. Okay, so there's a lot of different things to consider when you're building out these policies for how to effectively manage your assets. So first of all, what is an asset? Something the company has that they care about, right? Okay, it's either physical or intangible, and we know that it's something that's going to be helpful to the company's performance. All right, so think about data maintenance, okay? Probably a very important thing is making sure that whatever platforms your data is hosted on, be it a SQL server, be it a PostgreSQL server, whatever, you're doing basic updates. Now, updates, of course, as we all know, are important because they patch vulnerabilities. And if we're keeping up with vulnerabilities, that means what? It means we're reducing our potential threats, right? So that's an important thing, obviously. Storage. Okay, I don't just mean storing it once. I mean maintaining proper backups. Consider using, various platforms for that. I'm not here to tell you that you should go with RAID, UNRAID, ZFS. I'm not here to debate a file system with you, okay? But certainly look into those and decide what works best for your organization. I think there are pros and cons to pretty much any approach. And it's going to be highly dependent upon the specific factors. All right, data loss prevention. So this is really dealing with the potential for a nefarious employee to come along and export an entire database and run away with it. All right, and this happens all the time. All right, I'm not trying to pick on any particular profession, but let's use the example of car salesmen. Okay, so it's a kind of a, I wouldn't say stereotype, but they have a bit of a reputation. Whenever they leave, they take their contacts with them. Okay, and they go to the next dealership that they're working for, and they call up those people and they try to offer them deals. Okay, is that unethical? Okay, most likely it's going to be considered unethical. I'm not here to debate the ethics of it, but that could be considered data theft. And why do I have theft in quotation marks? Is it actually theft? So last class, what did I define theft as? It's a deprivation of something physical, right? Okay, so if you copy a database, they still have the database. It's not theft. It's unauthorized copying, which is still bad, but it's not theft. All right, and there's two major types of data loss prevention appliances we have. We have network-based and host-based. So network-based is going to be operating, likely it's going to be a service on a firewall. Okay, that's where it's going to be most of the time. Now, obviously, in that context, we'd be referring to a layer 7 or next-gen firewall, but it's probably just going to be a service on there. And then host-based, obviously, is going to be installed on each workstation accessing whatever data you're trying to prevent loss of. And in that context, okay, what's going to happen is it's going to prevent that sort of action from taking place. All right, so does everyone understand data loss prevention? Like I said, think of it as being either a service on a firewall or something installed locally. And I would say in almost every case it's going to be network-based. Okay, because you have an employee, you may have 500 employees, and they may have 500 laptops. Is it going to be easy to install software on 500 laptops? Okay, with desktops it's pretty easy, right? Because plugging into the corporate network, we can easily do stuff like group policy, roll out, whatever we want. Okay, we can still do that with laptops, but is it as easy? Why is it more difficult with a laptop? Anyone know? Okay, so the main reason is a corporate laptop is less likely to be plugged in to the corporate network. Okay? So the idea is you have to then go forth and use additional, maybe like MDM solutions and that sort of stuff. Okay. So, for those of you who work at IT, talk to the, I guess it'd be Patrick. Is that right? Isn't he the person who does the desktop? Isn't he the person who leads that group? Yeah, that sort of thing. Like I said, talk to him. Ask him. If you have a desktop that you can just assign any group policy you want to it, it's not very difficult at all. You just have to use additional measures for laptops, especially laptops that aren't on campus all the time. It's not impossible, okay? There's very little in technology that will be impossible. It's just how hard are you willing to work for it? All right? So, could you consider using BYOD? That makes management easier and more difficult at the same time, right? So these are certain considerations. Asset handling requirements. Now, let's go back here and say we did use BYOD, okay? And we want to use a network-based data loss prevention. Why would we not want to use the host-based? Exactly, okay? So if you have a personal, like my laptop right here, that's my personal laptop, okay? If Fort Lewis asked me to install a piece of software on it, I'd be pretty suspicious, okay? So I don't know what they're doing with it. So otherwise be network-based. Now, you may say, well, what if someone's off-site? Okay, then you could restrict access to be using the corporate network to access the resource, and they can VPN in. Okay, that would probably be the best approach there, right? Does everyone understand that? So network-based for personal devices and probably even company devices. Because let's face it, if you're installing something on 500 machines, even if you can push it out with a click of a button, all right, you still got to update it all the time, right? Isn't it much easier to update one service than 500 applications? Definitely. All right, so this is basic sort of system deployment stuff. Asset handling requirements. All right. So, we talked about some of the previous ones. Handling sensitive information. All right. Would it be a good idea to, as soon as an employee begins a job, to just toss them the keys to the database? Would that be a good idea? Most likely not. Now, if they're database administrator, probably can't be avoided, right? Well, let's say that they're just a random employee just starting. Okay. The idea is here that you're not just giving everything away immediately. Yeah, there's some sort of a process in place. And these processes are not going to be very simple. Okay, so, the overarching principle is we want to have least access privilege. Okay? And we, of course, accomplish that by stuff like role-based access control. Okay, so whatever position you are, you can access the minimum amount that you need to do your job. Okay, there's no reason for certain positions to be able to access certain things. All right. Data collection limitation. So this is where it becomes vital. We've talked about this in the past couple of chapters. It's vital to follow your own company's privacy policy. You don't collect information you don't say you're collecting. You don't use it in a way that you're not saying you're using it. Okay? Now, you could argue between opt-in and opt-out for that. I'm not going to get into that whole debate, but follow your company privacy policy. Okay, there's a reason that those things are so hard to read, because they're there to protect the company. All right, so if you blow it off, that's not a very wise thing to do, because it's there to protect your company. Now, the book says consider not collecting certain information. And I'd say consider it. And I'd say weigh it against everything else. Okay? So, for instance, let's say you're a website, and that's your company, your e-commerce. Consider having ads. Okay, if you're selling stuff on your website anyway, you probably don't need ads. Some e-commerce sites still have ads for other sites, though. Personally, I think that's kind of funny. but they do. Okay. So consider whether or not you're going to allow those ads to collect information. If you don't allow the ads to collect information, what's going to happen to your revenue per ad? It's going to increase or decrease? It's going to decrease. Consider what that means. All right? There's no one right or wrong answer here. There's a lot of different approaches you can take. Okay? Do whatever makes sense for your company. All right? Personally, I would say when you get to a company, chunk your textbook out the door and do what makes sense. Okay? Don't get caught up on textbook definitions. All right, does that make sense? Now, for this class, okay, do get caught up on textbook definitions. I think that makes a lot of sense. When you're studying for certifications, do get caught up on textbook definitions. But once you're in the private sector, follow your company culture. Follow what makes sense for your company. Data location. Yeah, this is pretty obvious. Okay, you wouldn't want to put data in a place where it can be easily obtained. Okay, so specifically sensitive data. So let's say you got a hospital. Okay, they got a nurse's station. All right, are they going to be putting up, the entire patient's record for everyone to see? No, they're going to have it blocked off physically, right? Okay, because you don't want everyone to be able to see everything. All right. This also goes back to where the data is ultimately stored. All right. You got a server. It has your entire company's everything on it. All right. Are you going to want to be putting that server in the lobby? Why not? Can anyone just walk away with the entire server? Yeah. Okay. That would affect what, by the way? Which of the three CIA triad would that affect if someone just walked away with a server? It would affect access. What else may it affect? Could it affect the confidentiality? Even with encryption, okay? With infinite time, anything's going to be decryptable, right? It's just a matter of how much time do you have. Okay? So even integrity may be affected. Let's say they walk away with a server and then they bring it back 30 minutes later with some sort of malicious application that manipulates records. Okay, probably financial records in that case. Could affect all three. So use common sense. All right, destroying data. This is an interesting topic, okay? Who likes to destroy data? Anyone in here a big data destruction fan? Okay, Ben is. What's your favorite way to destroy data? Good deal. That's certainly a good way, okay? You got a hard drive with magnetic disks, okay? You drill through it, it's going to be very difficult, if not impossible, to restore that data. I would personally suggest using multiple ways, especially for highly sensitive drives. All right, so erasing. All right, that one's not going to be a very good way by itself, especially on mechanical drives, but even on solid-state drives. A better approach would be erasing followed by overwriting. There's several programs that do that. DBAN, of course, being a famous, I think it's open source. I know it's free. There's many others as well, okay? So BleachBit, all right, if you go on their website, they have a piece of merchandise that a little bit political in nature, but some of you may get a kick out of that, okay? So the idea is that BleachBit came into play when it was used to wipe the contents of a private email server that was used by a political figure. Okay, I'm sure most of you know who I'm talking about. I'm not stating an opinion on that, by the way. I'm just saying BleachBit still uses that in their marketing, which is kind of funny, okay? Purging. Okay, so purging, of course, is being very similar to overwriting, and that you're removing it. And then, of course, you have degaussing. That's going to be done with a very strong magnet. Most of the time, electromagnet, but not always. Okay? And, the idea there is that it will make the drive completely unreadable. It's going to be pretty effective by itself. But, like Ben was saying, take the drive and destroy it. All right? Maybe it's just fun to take it out back and beat it with a sledgehammer. Okay? I'm not here to tell you what to do with your life. All right. Personally, I think most companies are going to have the policy of overwriting, then degaussing, then destroying for highly sensitive drives. Okay, if they just plop let's say they plop an NVMe out of a laptop, are they going to go through all that process? Maybe not. Okay, but for their server drives, and especially like their database, NAS and SAN, that sort of stuff, yeah, you're going to go through that whole process. Overwrite everything, replace it with basically junk data. A lot of times it's going to be like ones and zeros, but not always. You're going to degauss it. You're going to physically destroy it. Okay, the idea here is you want to prevent data remnants. Okay, so data remnants is where there's data that can still be restored. This is a bigger factor on mechanical hard drives than solid states, but it's still a factor on solid states. All right. So all I'm going to say about data retention is follow your company policies, follow your regulations. Okay, because this is going to vary widely by industry. It's going to vary even by company within the industry. So for instance, when I was at Mississippi State, okay, I was required to maintain records of all examinations and all student work for a period of 2 years. All right, so you know what I did with that? All right, basically at the end of every exam, got the paper test, plopped them in a box, never once opened the things. All right, I followed the policy, but I didn't really intend to ever use them. Now, let's say hypothetically that you're at an R1 place, like, say SEC school. You guys know SEC schools, right? What are they known for? They're known for football, okay? Let's say someone had a famous football player in their classroom, okay, and they have students sign the exam, okay? Could they sell that autograph? It's physically possible. It'd be breaking all sorts of policies, and it'd be breaking one major regulation. What is that regulation? FERPA. Exactly right. Okay. It'd be an egregious violation of it, by the way. Now, a regulation like FERPA, look this up for yourselves if you don't believe me. There's very few, if any, lawsuits regarding it. Okay. It's not really heavily enforced. Now, you go through FERPA training, which I assume most of you who work for the school in some capacity or have worked for the school probably had to do it. They made a big deal about it. I'm not saying it's not important. I'm saying there are very few, if any, lawsuits that used it. I can think of 5 that tangentially used it, but not even directly. So, not legal advice by any means, but keep that in mind. All right, data protection. So you got digital rights management. Okay, who's a big DRM fan in here? No one? Wow, imagine that. Okay, so there's a couple different major types of it. You have always-on DRM. Okay, if you're not a regular DRM fan, I'm sure you just can't get enough of always-on DRM. Okay, it's always funny whenever the company servers are down and you can't play a game. Isn't that always funny? Okay, it's a bit of a bummer too. All right, continuous audit. Continuous audit, of course, is going to be used to basically continually verify that the license is active and is being used in accordance with it. This can be arguably similar to something like spyware. What's the difference between it and spyware, though? Starts with a C. Consent. Okay, you consent to use it when you sign the license, or you consent when you agree to the license. So, I'm not here to state an opinion on that, but that's what it is. Okay, automatic expiration. It's going to be quite common for like rented content, where the content will not allow it to be used after its period ends. All right. So if you didn't love DRM, I hope you do now. I actually don't care if you like DRM or not. Okay. Cloud Access Security Broker. It's very similar to DRM in a lot of ways, and basically what it does is it monitors the organization's use of cloud services. Now, there's a lot of different uses for this. Okay, so the first is going to be just general employee monitoring, making sure that employees are doing what they're supposed to and not doing stuff that they're not supposed to do. I think that you know some stuff that you're not supposed to do. I think that's pretty obvious. Could also be used to ensure there's no sort of shadow IT cloud services. So what shadow IT cloud services would be is, let's say that a member not of the IT department, decides I want to use some cloud services. So I go and I set up an alternative to Canvas. Okay, that's shadow IT. It's not sanctioned by the IT department. No, I didn't actually do that, so don't go reporting me, or do. I'll be found innocent. But anyway, you get the idea here. All right. Then you have how do you pronounce this word? Is it pseudonymization? We'll go with that. All right. It's basically obfuscation. Okay. This is not the only security measure you should ever use. In fact, I would personally say don't bother with it. The book has a different opinion, so consider whatever opinions you like and then make your own opinion. But basically, if you're following all the other security guidelines, you're just making your work harder with this one, all right? So why make your work harder? All right. So the book uses the example of hospital records where you basically change the names around. Okay, all the information is still there. You just made it more difficult to work. So to me, it's not necessarily the best approach. All right, any questions about these? All right, and you also got tokenization. Tokenization is basically where we have some token we assign to replace some data point. So common example is going to be credit card. All right, it's not best practice to store a credit card. You store a token of the credit card. All right, I think that one's pretty self-explanatory there. And of course, anonymization. That's going to be where you take the data and you remove anything identifiable. So it differs from this one right here because when you're obfuscating the data, it's still identifiable, all right? Okay, you just change what the identifier is. In anonymization, okay, you're actually just removing the identifier altogether, okay? So some common data roles, we're going to go through these kind of quickly here. You got your data owner. It's going to be the person in the company who doesn't necessarily own it, but they're responsible for the data. Okay, the asset owner is going to be the person in the organization who is basically tasked with maintaining the data, okay? Of course, you have your business mission owners, give your top level team there. Data processors and data collectors. I think that one should be pretty straightforward. Data processors are probably going to be your DBAs throughout the organization. And of course, data collectors are going to be probably the people collecting the data, okay? So data entry clerks, maybe your front office staff, whatever. You get the idea there. Okay, you got administrators. It's going to be very similar to a data processor, I would say. In some organizations, data processors may not necessarily be your DBAs. They may be your analysts. But there's lots of different approaches we can take. Okay, then users, obviously that's going to be the end user. All right, so some basic baselines to talk about. Okay, you got your principle of least access. We've covered that today. It's kind of related to the 800-53, which basically just says, give out as, these are the basic baselines you have, okay? And the idea here is that as the information becomes more damaging or potentially more damaging, okay, you treat it with more sensitivity. All right, so if you have directory information, it's going to be low impact. Okay, really all you're trying to do is just protect the integrity of that information. Okay, because you don't have to worry about the confidentiality of directory information. Does everyone understand that? Okay. And then, of course, as you get higher, we've talked about how you actually respond. So these are just some standards from NIST if you're interested. All right, so we're not done yet, but just to wrap up today's lesson, we covered how to manage data at an organizational standpoint, various policies and procedures, as well as some basic technological stuff. Now, I will note that as we go on throughout the chapters, they become more technologically involved. This is kind of setting the stage for policy and all that sort of stuff. So any questions? All right. We'll go ahead and stop the recording, and then we're going to talk about the assignment from last class.